All right, guys, we are back in my garage for another video, and we have to talk about it. The P-tuned S58-Swapped M240i. I got a really close look at it at PRI, and the car is pretty much as weird and wild as you were probably imagining. It's hard to convey it through video, and there are a lot of little details that I was able to see in person that I thought really set it off. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to do like a full interview with Norris about the car because he wasn't there when I was at the Garrett booth. So I just wanted to make a separate video to talk more specifically about the build and kind of what we know based on what they've shared on social media and stuff like that. And also answer the question a lot of people have been asking, why did they even do it? So let's go ahead and talk about it, and hopefully you guys find this video useful. Now, as always, for everybody that's new to the channel, I create these videos to help keep you updated on the latest developments in our community, as well as discuss technical topics so that we have a better understanding of how our engines work. So if you're interested in more videos like that, be sure to subscribe because there will be a lot more coming out in the future. So first of all, let's talk about the specs of the build, and I'm going to read off of my notes just to make sure I don't miss anything, but there were a lot of details on the car that I was pretty excited to see in person. So first thing, Garrett was excited to have them at the booth because it is running their brand new GXR 45 80mm turbo. They said that they're shooting for around 1,800 horsepower. So this is a really big turbo that can flow a lot of air. And we'll talk a little bit more about the details on that turbo in a little bit. It also has their stage 4.1 engine build, and do not ask me what that entails. There are so many different stages of engines and transmissions and cylinder heads and all of this stuff. I can't tell you what parts it's running, but it has basically all of their biggest upgrades to handle the most power that they could make. It also has Italian rods and pistons internals, which they specify are what they've been running for the past year or so with really good results. And so they've partnered with them on this build as well. And it is also running their stroker kit so that they can get more than 3 liters out of the engine. It has a SuperTech head. Again, they run SuperTech internals in pretty much all their cars. I think one of their development cars is even a SuperTech sponsored car, so it has their logo across the entire side of the Supra, so they work very closely with them as well and use a lot of their parts consistently. And then probably something you notice from pictures is they have an EOS intake manifold that does not have the integrated air-to-water intercooler, so a lot of people assume that it was running an air-to-air intercooler, kind of like the EOS Supra and some of the other fast cars that we've been seeing lately. However, it still has an air-to-water intercooler. It just has a huge aftermarket core mounted between the engine and the radiator. So this is something that I think is actually really cool, and I saw a lot of people talking about this. So I think this was actually a really cool detail. Again, we'll talk about it a little more, but just keep in mind it is still running an air-to-water intercooler, just an aftermarket external unit. Now the S58 is paired to an HP51 transmission, which I was actually surprised by. I thought they were going to be using an HP76, but they paired it to an HP51, and then they're controlling the engine with a Motec ECU, and then the transmission will be controlled with a turbo Lamic. So they'll have full capability to dial in everything that they want to get the best performance for drag racing and all of the customization they want with the engine tuning. And then they also are running Dodson clutches and upgraded internals in the transmission, the transfer case, and they are also running an upgraded converter. So let's go ahead and jump back into some of those finer details. And a big one, of course, being at the Garrett booth is the brand new Garrett Turbo. So it is the GXR 45 Turbo. It is an 80mm option, and it is their new line called GX Race. And these turbos have options for varying different specs of racing and classes, but this is, as far as I can tell, the biggest one that they offer. And so they show that it's rated for up to 1,800 horsepower. And they're saying that a lot of these turbos are matching older ones, except it just flows more. And so they see up to 29% more compressor flow at the same boost level. And I thought a really good illustration of that was this chart showing the flow characteristics. And you can see that the pressure ratio is on the left. That's essentially how much boost you're running. And then the amount of airflow is along the bottom. So that's how much airflow is going through the turbo. And as the chart moves to the right, that means that you're getting more airflow at the same boost levels. So Going up means you can run it at higher boost pressures. Going to the right means it flows more air. And for all intents and purposes, you want it to move that chart over to the right so that you don't have to run more boost to get more airflow. And that's exactly what this chart is showing. If you see the before and after, it brings a lot of that area of the chart that's up high and required running higher boost levels and moves it over to the right so you're running more efficiently. So what that means is less strain on the turbo, you're getting lower IATs because you're not creating as much heat, and just overall, it's a more efficient setup. So this car can now flow more air, which translates to a higher horsepower capacity, as long as all the rest of the supporting mods make it possible. And I think their setup absolutely will make it possible because they have the turbo mounted in the front grille with this custom carbon fiber duct. So as you're driving down the track, all of the air will be shoved straight into the intake of the turbo. Hopefully, you know, it's not pulling us out of the stands in its gravitational pull, but suffice it to say, it's gonna be really powerful when it gets that ram air effect as it starts rolling down the track. Another detail was the Vargas single high pressure fuel pump conversion. And I noticed that while I was there, but this is something that we've actually seen announced a couple weeks ago by Vargas. I just hadn't really seen anybody else using it yet. But it's interesting that they did this right off the bat, especially with this build. It's not even done yet. They still hadn't installed injectors and stuff like that when it was up there for show, but they had already switched over to a single high pressure fuel pump setup, indicating they knew from the get-go that that was going to be a part of their strategy. The issue that I've seen and a lot of people have had is when you have two high pressure fuel pumps on that exhaust cam, it creates the cam walk or the cam drift, or basically what we were talking about in a previous video. That is also a characteristic people can run into on Gen 2 B58s. And this is exacerbated when you have really high combustion pressures, really high spring rates on your head. You know, all of your valve springs that are stronger to support your aftermarket cams are also pushing against the exhaust cam. And all of that makes it harder for the cam to hit its targets since everything is controlled by oil pressure. So you can try to increase oil pressure and get a little bit more control over the Vanos targets, but that's not always enough. And the easiest thing to do in this case is just remove the secondary high pressure fuel pump, because you have extra port injectors, or in this case, it looks like they're going to be running 2 rows of port injectors. So more than enough fuel to support whatever your horsepower goals are. And then you can take some load off of the DI to make more power up top, where you're going to be running mostly port injection anyway. So that's kind of the idea behind it. It just blocks off one of the mounts for the second high pressure fuel pump and runs new hard lines that splits the feed for the single high pressure fuel pump to all 6 of the injectors. Now, the other option would be just to lock the Vanos adjustment so it would not have variable valve timing anymore. And that, of course, eliminates the need to control your valve timing. But having the benefit of a working Vanos system gives you better spool, better performance, better efficiency. So it is nice to be able to maintain that. I know a lot of people, it seems like in the past, were leaning towards just locking it out because a more traditional engine wouldn't need it anyway. And you can still make power, but by having control over the Vanos, it makes it a lot easier to make the power with a wide power band. And then the last thing is the air-to-water intercooler. And I've been wanting to talk about this, but it's hard to make a dedicated video. But this was something that Wagner introduced back in 2021. I don't know if anybody else remembers this, but when they originally started talking about developing their upgraded intake manifold, they also said that they were going to design a system like this and put it out there. So instead of having the air-to-water intercooler integrated into the intake manifold, they have this huge core that's mounted on the charge pipe where you have all this space between the engine and the cooling fan, and that would allow you to flow a lot more water and get a lot better efficiency out of the intercooler setup. Right now, our biggest limitation is just that the run is so small. There's not enough space in the intake manifold to run a significantly larger core. So yes, it can support a lot of power, but if you want capability like what we see on S55 cars and stuff like that, you need to be able to run like a brick. You need a huge core with a lot more airflow to efficiently make the power with adequate cooling. And we just don't have the space to do that on the B58 design. So it's really interesting to see the way that they did this, although I'm positive it probably comes with a lot of sacrifices. I'm sure they're probably deleting their air conditioning setup, and the radiator setup probably is very customized. So I'm not sure how they were able to fit everything up front. But as you can see with how it was mounted in my video, it seems to all fit fine. So they were able to make it work. And for a race car, I can see that as being a significant advantage, because now they can still run an ice box. That's really going to be the only way to get IATs below ambient. And so that should be a huge factor in improving your performance at the racetrack. So yeah, interesting shift, especially when we see so many other cars switching to an air-to-air intercooler. They chose to keep it, just switch to that huge aftermarket core that comes with a lot of benefits on its own. So with all that in mind, now the big question is, why? What was the point in running an S58? And I think the easiest person to tell you is probably Norris.
This build here is a little bit unique from what we normally do. First of all, obviously S58, we've been messing around with the B58 here for about 4 or 5 years. We wanted to try something different.
So he literally just said they just wanted to try it. They've been making big horsepower B58s for a very long time. S58 is kind of the next thing up from there, and they wanted to see what they could do. And I think what they did with this car is definitely in the right direction. And of course, the S58 has a lot of other advantages as well, because even just drag racing, the oil setup that's designed for circuit racing will also give you advantages and extra reliability as you're pulling really high Gs on the launch. And when you pull your parachute and stuff, you want to make sure that the engine stays together. So having the upgraded oil system and the upgraded cooling and everything else that's included with the S58 should only be an advantage to them from a reliability and performance standpoint. Now, I do think they went with the M240 for the easier integration of the xDrive system. I know we've seen some people do an xDrive swap on an M2, but when it already comes with an M240, it seemed like it was a little bit easier to go that route, and everything can be upgraded from there, so you don't need to figure out mounting and custom tuning and stuff like that. All of the drivetrain systems and everything are already integrated, which is probably a part of the reason why they stuck with the HP51. But, you know, I guess we'll see as everything comes together if that ends up being a significant advantage or not. You could tell the car was running a very meaty setup, so it's definitely designed for drag racing, and the xDrive can only help in most scenarios. But yeah, really interesting setup. I think that's the first S58 swapped anything I've seen, and it was very interesting to swap it into, you know, an M240 versus doing like an M2 xDrive conversion like we've seen in the past. Just two different ways to kind of skin that horse, and hopefully this ends up hitting their performance goals. They expect it to run low 7s. That was kind of their goal. And at 1800 horsepower, it definitely should be possible. So hopefully this car comes out swinging next year. I'll keep you guys in the loop as I see any new development. But otherwise, I think that's it for this video. So thank you guys for watching, and I hope this helps. And if you have any other questions or comments, leave them down below.